thanks. Like, hey, Scoob, did you hear Nikki Blake is hosting a Scooby-Doo panel? No. Yeah. Like on today's Scooby-Doo episode, Scooby-Doo and Shaggy meet Nikki Blake. Yeah, and a Scooby Panel. Like, we need to get this puppy started. Okay, Nikki Blake, take it away, Scooby-Doo.
On today's episode of the Scooby Panel, Nikki meets director, writer, producer, and storyboard artist Joe Sichta. So excited that you're here and that we're finally talking. This is great. I love talking to the people that have worked on Scooby-Doo. I think it's important for them to be able to, share their careers and for people to know who they are, because a lot of people don't know the people that work on the shows. Maybe they know a name, but they don't usually know a face. They don't know much about these people. And the whole goal of the panels and the interviews that we do is so that people know who you are, because you've created Scooby-Doo. And if you can tell, I love Scooby-Doo. The people that are watching love Scooby-Doo. And it's just really important to me that people know the people that worked on it. So,
well, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Why do you love Scooby-Doo so much?
So when I was a kid, I think I kind of used Scooby-Doo to like get lost in, so I wasn't dealing with things that were going on. And just growing up, I kind of stayed with that. Like, Scooby was my go-to if I wasn't feeling good or having issues or, working through something. And I guess it just became an obsession. Like, my entire room is Scooby-Doo. I have Scoobies everywhere in this room. So,
well, that's glorious. I mean, it's always our hope when we make these things that they bring happiness, that we love making them because we love living in Scooby Land as well, and they're such fun characters. It's such a fun world that Ewo and the guys at Hanna-Barbera created for all of us to grow up with. And there's so much love in it and fun and a little spooky. I mean, there's all these wonderful things about it. Yeah, that make it a nice comfort food kind of show. And the characters have always resonated with me as well. I remember as a kid watching it, loving it, growing up. And it's just amazing to see it continue to go on. It's been 15 years since I last did a Scooby movie, and it's continued to just go through all these permutations. Right. So it's still going. It's pretty great after 50 plus years now.
Yeah, almost 55.
55.
That's pretty incredible for a cartoon character.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So how did you become interested in art and writing? And did you do both growing up, or did one come after the other?
Yeah, I started off drawing. As funny as you were saying, watching Scooby as sort of an escape, drawing was an escape for me. And so I would escape from the chaos and hecticness of my own life and go to my room and just draw stories and make up stories and characters. And I didn't realize at the time, but I was essentially storyboarding. I was, as for fun, I was storyboarding. I wasn't really a comic book person. I was an animation and movie person. So it was filmmaking and storytelling and in sort of like planning out like it was going to be a movie is what I was doing. Other friends of mine were doing, we're really into comic books, and we're doing comic book layouts and panels, and that's a whole other sort of discipline and approach to storytelling, which I love and respect and have a huge admiration for and no talent for. But for me, planning out shots and stories and thinking about what I was trying to get down. If I couldn't make the movie, but I could plan the movie, was sort of what I was doing. And in hindsight, I finally got into animation in film school. I went to film school to study live action filmmaking, and then animation was actually just more affordable and more controllable and dynamic. It was so dynamic. I just suddenly got very, very interested in, wow, I have so much control, and I can I can actually produce movies with a little bit more it certainly was more financially viable as a college student, in the 80s when I was at film school and you were using real film and real cameras, and it was expensive to make a movie because you had to get the film developed and it took a long time. Animation, you use everything you shoot for the most part. You edit a little bit, but it wasn't like doing a live action movie where you shoot all this stuff and then you don't use so much of it. You're blowing money. So it became really financially economic, but it was also fun and it got a great response from the audience. And so there was, some early days of early success. I was like, wow, this could be a something I could want to do professionally. But I was going to school at Southern Illinois University. I'm from a small town in the Midwest in Northern Illinois. I had no idea how to get to Hollywood or how to get into animation. I had no clue except just to do it. That was the only answer, was just to do it. I will find my way. And I actually at the library, at the Morris Library at Southern Illinois University, I found one book on animation production. But it laid out all the steps. It laid out everything how to do it. And because there really wasn't much of an animation program at the university. And so I used that book and the camera and my professors who helped me as much as they could, and certainly their help they were a ton of help in the production process of film itself, but the actual techniques of animation and how to shoot it, how to structure it, how to approach production. I learned a lot from just that one single small book that I was lucky enough to find in the library, because this is before the internet. It's before, how is a kid in the middle of nowhere in Illinois gonna find out anything about animation production? That one book and a camera over there, and hours and hours at my own desk, there was going to be the way to put together this thing that could eventually become a career. And that's kind of how I started.
Wow, that's really cool that it was just from a book that you learned everything. And
Yeah, well, it was great because it was, the whole film production process was laid out right in front of me in terms of, cutting, editing your work print and cutting negative to make your final answer print. All this whole process, it doesn't really even exist anymore because everything's gone digital. But in those days, it was such a physical process. It was such a specific mechanical process. And when I got finally to Warner Brothers as an assistant long, long ago, and we can go through that story, but I realized that the studio was just doing a bigger version of what I was doing in 16 millimeter film at college. They were doing 35 millimeter film. Other than that, it was the same process. It was just a different film format. So in a way, all that film school preparation helped me when I was able to find my way up to being a producer, to understand the entire process of how a studio works, because really it just serves that same production process, which is so specific and specialized and technical, that I had that good technical background, and then the creativity, to come on top of it. About, there's how to make it and then there's what you make. And those are two different things to learn, and they're both super challenging. So, but back to your first question, it was the drawing first, then it was the filmmaking and the process. And it wasn't until I had already been storyboarding and directing even at Warner Brothers for quite a few years that I got into the writing piece, that I started to I never really wrote very much, but I learned the structure of script writing and animation, how important that was for the production process. It's probably out of annoyance a little bit, that we need to follow a really distinct script. It's important that the script informs us on the production side. So I started writing because I wanted a better production process, and it was just easier to get up the chain and get things handled at the script stage. And then I got really into the story side of it and realized there's again a whole other world of craft there and how to tell a story, and got into that world. So it's sort of layers of the onion, I guess, of processing through the different disciplines that go into animated filmmaking. And I've just worked really hard. I'm just get obsessed with it, spend a lot of hours doing it, and don't be afraid to fail, or particularly look stupid. That's maybe what I've specialized in, looking stupid professionally for 25 years, and here I am.
well, it definitely paid off. I mean, you've worked on so many different things. So
Well, it's paid off, but it's also been, I mean, all along that way, that the magic of looking stupid and not being afraid to fail is that you find fabulous people, particularly in this industry, that guide you, help you, team up with you, partner with you, mentor you. And that's another piece of it, is getting around the other people who are doing it professionally and finding out what kind of people they are, and sharing together as we try to figure out what we're making together, helping each other get better at what we do. It's such a multidisciplinary uh, industry, and it takes such technique and expertise from so many different disciplines and sources, that to bring all these together takes a really talented group of people, and usually those people are pretty wonderful to work with as human beings. So it's sort of a magic sauce of talent, technique, discipline, hard work, and just being around some really fabulous people who are willing to share what they know, so you can grow as an artist, as a filmmaker, as a producer or writer, whatever piece of it you're in. It is definitely an apprentice master sort of relationship that can develop. But also, just you can just learn by just being around your peers, and you want to be better. You see other people getting better, and you want the projects to be great, and it's been a great ride.
Were there specific people in the industry that inspired you to get into and continue in animation?
Well, yeah, I mean, what the Animaniacs was on uh the in 1992, when I was at college. Animaniacs was on the Fox block with Tiny Toons and Batman Adventures. This was the early 90s, and Warner Brothers was having their resurgence, and I was just over the moon for Animaniacs. I loved it. It was just happened to be getting into animation right at that time. Here was this fantastic show. And I was lucky enough to end up at Warner Brothers Animation when those shows were still going on, and to work for the fabulous producer Tom Ruger, who was putting all of those shows together, and Bruce Timm, who was doing Batman, then went on to do Superman. When I joined the studio as an assistant answering phones, those were the guys that were running things. And they had an incredible group of talented people all underneath them. It was such an awesome place to land, from the cornfields to the center of the action, but as a guy literally answering phones. But when you're that guy, you get to run around and talk to everybody. And so I just ran around the studio and learned how it worked, and talked to everybody and tried to figure out what can I do to help, and where can I go to grow and learn in this wild place full of so much creativity and opportunity. So yeah, it was sort of a magic time, and it was also my introduction to how the business works, and how sort of cyclical it can be, and it's always sort of unstable, and things are always changing. But that was the beginning. I think there was there for 4 years. It was about a 4 or 5 year ride. My first stint at Warner Brothers, that was sort of, things kind of go in eras. But it was definitely Animaniacs that sort of brought me in, to loving. I was always loved animation, but what was happening for me professionally and where I could find a way in, Warner Brothers was doing super great stuff. And Disney was really busy at those days too. There was a lot going on, in the early 90s in animation, for sure. Disney TV and Sony TV. Sony was on its way up. I think by the 96, 97, there was Sony was producing Godzilla and Rusty and the Big Guy and Starship Troopers. They were doing a lot of action shows, and Ghostbusters, Extreme Ghostbusters. That stuff was all going on at Sony, and then Warner Brothers was sort of doing these comedy things, and Disney were doing their sort of afternoon shows. It was a wild time, but all these great people, all these people that were my age cohort at that time, were just getting in. So a lot of us are now old gray-haired people, but that's where we all started at these different studios, and then we end up working with each other as the years roll by. You pop from studio to studio and eventually meet kind of everybody sort of gets to know everybody over time. But now there's a ton of new people and fresh young people that have come in over the last 10 years, and I don't know any of them.
Yeah.
But they're great. They're doing amazing work. But you sort of just know your people, and you have your team that you kind of work with, and you roll up, through the years together. And always, every time there's a project, I try to hire all the best people that I know and love, and because we just get right back to it again.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great. If you didn't go into animation, what field would you have gone into?
Oh wow. Oh wow. That's really tough. Yeah, I don't know. I always knew I was going to come to California. I always knew I actually wanted to get into live action movie making. And I still, even though as I found animation at college, I was still passionate about live action filmmaking. And Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez and all the indie and Kevin Smith, all those guys were making their movies as I came into Hollywood in 1994 or 5 when I got here. And so I was started to make an independent movie on the side myself, on the weekends while I was working in Warner Brothers. I started independent movie making. So I was passionate about live action movie making too, but it's way harder than animation. The world just fights you. There's way too many things going wrong. I could never finish it. It was just too much to take on. So somewhere in out here, I have a storage facility full of film. It was still film. I was shooting on film. I have a bunch of film canisters full of undeveloped negative and all kinds of work prints and things from that indie movie. But I always thought I would end up doing, live action and animation, and realize that animation is such a discipline in of its own right. And you really kind of pick a lane. And animation was just calling to me. So I guess I don't know if it's a cheat of an answer, but if I didn't do animation, I probably would have ended up somewhere in the live action side of things. And you always have that itch you want to scratch. You're sort of like, oh, I always kind of wanted to do that. And I don't know that I have that anymore. I mean, animation has been such a powerful medium. It continues to just go on and on. I'm so fascinated by it, and I don't know that I have a huge burning desire anymore, to flip to the live action side. I think it's all just problem solving at one, in one way or the other. And live action is full of amazing people doing amazing work too. It's really hard though. The world really fights you, and in animation you just have more control over the medium, and there's the storytelling capabilities are so vast that I the appeal to pursue live action is probably less for me now. I would probably still find it really interesting and would go for it if an opportunity presented itself, but I'm so busy with animation right now, I hardly think of it. But yeah, I probably would have ended up somewhere over there, probably craft services, probably serving people coffee as far as I would have gotten.
What are your thoughts on them taking animated franchises and turning them into live action?
Yeah, I mean, Disney's seen quite a bit of success, doing that. I think probably more so earlier in their phase of flipping things to that. Animation is it's a powerful place to start an IP, and it's difficult. My kids were just showing me the latest Netflix, Last Airbender, clips that are going on. It's so hard to live up to something that was so perfect and so great. I don't think you can redo Last Airbender and do it justice. And no matter how wonderful a job they do on it, it's so hard to make that leap. I guess it just depends on what sort of entertainment you like. I find I think in that instance, like they're talking about doing a How to Train Your Dragon, live action, I believe, and that's one of my favorite movies, and I worked on the Dragon TV series. Maybe it'll be great, but there's such charm in the originals. So just personally, just speaking for me, I don't find the live actions as appealing just because I find the charm of the originals just to be so magical. It's lightning in a bottle. And in a way filmmaking is always trying to capture lightning in a bottle. And I guess a live action remake is an attempt to capture lightning again, but it's tough when there's source material that you're always sort of referencing, or especially something so zeitgeisty and well known as um, an animated classic. I mean, the live action Aladdin, did gangbusters, blockbuster at the box office, and people seem to really like it. I never saw it, but people seem to really like it. So if it's entertaining and people go and love it, it's awesome. Just personally, it's always so self-referential back to the original, and you go, I'd rather just be watching the original.
Right. Yeah.
That's just me.
Animation is an ever-changing, evolving field. Do you think that young people today trying to break into the business have better opportunities than those that worked in the pre-digital era? And is there still room for traditional art
Mhm.
in 2024 and beyond?
Yeah, we're such a disruptive and interesting time, right? The thing about what's happening in the business right now, it's always been hard to get into it. You have always had to pursue it with an obsession and to be able to compete for limited number of positions in an industry that is cyclical and only has so many productions going at any given time. So there's only so many positions that can be hired into. So to find yourself in a job market where you're able to apply for and get a job on a project that you have so much competition for anyway, it takes an incredible amount of discipline and hustle and networking and just it's so hard, slamming your head against this industry and trying to find the way in and get people to appreciate you. And I hate to say it, there are, hundreds of veteran, fabulously connected, incredibly talented and experienced people that have trouble finding work. So for young people coming into an industry, it's difficult because there's so many talented and qualified people. So few actual positions, and those positions are so insecure and cyclical. They don't last. It only lasts as long as the production lasts. So it's economically a really tough business to kind of stay in with sometimes because of that churn. And as a young person trying to get into it, you could all the passion and talent in the world. Yeah, you're going to need that to drive it and get in. And then once you're in, it's going to take quite a bit of perseverance to stay in. And you can get that job, that dream job, then 9 months later, the project's over and there just aren't any other projects for you. And you can be out of work for quite a bit of time. So it's challenging. I think it's more challenging from the structure of the way that the hiring is than it is necessarily about, can a young person with talent find their way into the industry? I think I always believe there's always room for young, talented people. I like to say, we always need the young lions. You always need people full of passion, energy, and youth that come in and reinvigorate any industry. And I would encourage anyone who's passionate about animation to pursue it. But I think the thing to look out for is that just the industry itself and the economics of the job hunt and the employment issue, it's really, really difficult because you're asking someone to pay you to do this, and it's really fun. And and you're giving your talents, to the project. But it is an exchange. It's an exchange of commerce. And so you're looking for a company or a studio to pay you to come and give your talents to a project. And that company or studio is working within an economic matrix that they don't really control, the environment, the Hollywood sort of being upside down in the streaming era and the huge pullback that we're kind of seeing in production across the board, not just animation. But it's got, it's going boom and bust like it's an accordion. It's always expanding and contracting. And so you're getting used to that rhythm and being able to survive economically while you surf the up and down waves of the industry itself is the key. I don't think it's necessarily harder or easier now than it's ever been. It's always about being able to show up and be a person who delivers, who produces, who can hit the mark for what the creative ask is for the role. What's I think become tougher, two things are tougher now. One, there isn't as much in-house production. Everything is so remote now post-COVID that it's really tough to know and get, learn to be with certain people and have a crew that's together in the same space with each other for hours on end every week. That's gone to a large extent. So it's tough to have that sort of relationship and proximity, and I miss it. I miss being in an animation studio. I've been working at home since COVID. And I'm working across lots of different things, and I've never been busier, but I've never been lonelier, Nikki. I've never missed my friends and going to lunch and being in being in an animation studio is just about the greatest vibe there is. It's just talented people everywhere working on something together is great. Doesn't quite exist the way that it used to anymore. That's a challenge. And then just as I said, the productions that have been scaled back. So, so you're working remote and then production dries up. You're not in sort of that proximity to the industry with each other. Like, there's not, an animation studio spends about half of its GDP on gossip. You know, what projects are coming up next? Who's doing what? What's the next thing in the pipe? Where's the next job? You know, I heard that this studio is doing something. Those guys are looking. That used to be the currency of the hallways. You know, what's going on? Because there's always projects kind of pumping through, and you're moving people around. And I guess it's probably a little bit like, you know, Major League Baseball, like Moneyball in that sense of like the talent is here and projects are there and you're like moving players and people around and people are always jumping around to the new thing. I think that's a much different game and harder to staff and be a part of now because of just that sort of whisper campaign just isn't there anymore. You don't know what's happening. And it's tough to sort of generate that. Walking down the hall and hearing a bit of news about a new project is one thing, but you know, how do you, you know, just texting with people or making the effort to try to go to lunch so for an hour you can figure out with each other what's happening in town. That's become much more difficult. So it's tough to find the information, I think, when you're a young person getting in. How do you get started? Where do you get started? Where are the opportunities? It's tough for anybody at any level to keep their finger on it anymore. And then as the industry is developing and moving now, and it's always developing and moving. I think that's something that is really important to understand is that the animation industry, the filmmaking industry has never sat still for a second. You know, it's always in a state of massive disruption, technological disruption, distribution disruption, modeled, you know, it's never sitting still, you know. It was movies and then it was television, it was radio and then it was movies and it was television and then it was cable and then it was DVD and now it's streaming. Like it's always been moving and now it's, you know, AI and social media everywhere. Like all this stuff it never sits still. So it might get kind of caught in eddies for a little bit. It might get stuck for a little bit, but it doesn't sit still for very long. And so I think you got to really have a mindset that you're going to be dynamic and think as someone who is a producer to think to produce, which is to harness the tools of production in order to try to figure out how to deliver some form of entertainment and intellectual property IP, a movie, TV show, a brand, whatever it is you're trying to, a 7-second joke, whatever it is you're trying to put together to produce is to harness the power and production tools and then wield them, you know, for the intended outcome. And so I think now there's never been a more exciting time because the technology is lowering the barrier to entry for people to create things. And so, you know, I think all of the studios, independent animators and giant studios are all looking at, you know, what this now means with AI coming in. How do we harness it in an ethical way? How do we solve creative problems and production problems? Can it help us solve those? Can it reduce the cost of production? Can there be new jobs created in AI? That are still creative and artistic. I think you'll always need a human being to wield it as a tool, to use it for the outcome. That, you know, I don't really want to watch anything made by an AI. I want to watch something, I'm happy to watch something that a human has used. If they use AI to make it, as long as it's their vision and they haven't stolen anyone else's artwork to do it, and there are AI models that don't rely on stolen imagery, then that's just like, to me, like using Photoshop. It's like using another tool, as long as it's the person's intended vision. Or sometimes, you know, a lot of times in an animation production, you know, as a producer, I'll have an idea for something, I'll sketch out an idea, and then a designer will come along and that person will give me something I was 10 billion times better than what I had in mind, you know? And I think AI might sort of work like that in some instances if we feed it what we want to do, and it might pop out something that maybe is better than what we wanted. You never know. It's always an experience of discovery when you're in production. You're always collaborating with fellow artists, wielding whatever tools that will help you produce something as efficiently and quickly and at a high level of execution as you can. As a producer, I think it's a responsibility to investigate these new tools and figure out how we can harness them. But it's also important to protect our work when we put it out and to not allow AI to be able to scrape and take our work. So it's a very, very interesting time. There's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of opinions about this. I'm sort of stuck. I'm sort of right in the middle of all of it because I'm working with a lot of these concepts and tools and also trying to balance where we are with the ethical authorship of content and then protecting our work if we're going to put something out that AI can't come along and scrape it. So there's quite a bit of interesting dynamics currently afoot at the same time as the streaming macro environment, the economic environment of streaming is sort of up on its head. They spent tons and tons of money on streaming content, and they realize they're not really making their money back. That's why streamers have been raising their prices. Disney's been talking about pulling back on as much production as they're going to do. They've realized that the economic model isn't working. So this is really a long-winded answer to your question. Can a young person come into this industry, come in an industry that has a model, economic model that's upside down on its head? It's got a new technological disruption coming in. It's lowering the barrier to entry for anybody that wants to get in. It's very powerful. Still requires a great deal of discipline, and by discipline I mean expertise and dedication to learning the craft of picture making and storytelling and design. All those things will never, I hope, never go away. That's the person in the middle making things. Those are the disciplines that they're wielding and editing and choosing to put their stamp on something and say, I think this is good. I think this is funny. I think I'll put my name on this and put it out. So I think there's a very exciting time afoot. In the near moment, in the now moment, it's very, very economically challenging to join this industry. But those are these times of great disruption are the times of greatest opportunity. Things are changing, and a lot of people are worried and screaming about the changes or crying about the changes, and you got to embrace it. It has never stopped moving. And once I understood that, I'm like, oh, this thing is never, ever sitting still. That's exciting. I can get behind something that's never sitting still. So I won't sit still. I'll just keep surfing, figuring out where it goes. And so it keeps it interesting. That way, it's never a dull moment. I will say that.
Yeah. One thing that you said was, with everyone working from home, you don't really know the new people that have come into the industry. When you were working, you got to work with side by side with other animators. So I would assume that you learned a lot from them. How are the newer people coming in learning from, say, the veteran animators?
Yeah. I don't know. That's a real problem. It's a real problem. This whole industry has always been a master apprentice craft. It's a craft.
Right.
Right? And crafts work by master apprenticeship. You get underneath the wing of a master, and they teach you a few things. They don't tell you everything, but they'll teach you a few things, and they'll let you go out and bust your knuckles against it until you figure it out. But they're there for you, to sort of guide you. And I really don't know. That's one of the things I do worry about, that it really isn't that sort of apprentice master relationship anymore. I'm not sure how people are training up. I think, I'm hopeful that they're reaching out and supporting each other. But it's definitely difficult to have that mentor relationship. Um, I think you can, I think to a degree, if you are working with a really good director, that director through osmosis, you'll start to pick up on what's important to that director. And so if you're an artist, storyboard artist, character designer, background designer, animator, over time, the notes that you'll get, if you pay really close attention to, if you can reduce your anxiety and reaction to, oh my God, all these notes. If you can dig into what they're looking for, if you're working with a talented director, you'll start to see the patterns of their training, what it is that I feel like I always make the same 5 notes. I'm always looking for the same thing. So I want something really clear, and I want action to be really, really clear in a place that we can see it. I want really nice composition. I want to be able to, have the camera somewhere that is relative, that makes sense to why that you took that angle. It isn't popping you out of the scene. Those are really basic. My notes are super basic. I always go back to the same 5 or 6 core ideas. So I think that there are things you can kind of pick up on, like, oh, this director is looking for a certain thing, but why? Oh, because that's a form of stable storytelling that is working. I can start to hone that piece. Doesn't mean I have to go that direction. I could do any kind I want, but I might pick up that person's sense of style, or why that's important to them. Same as you can from watching a movie, and watching a Martin Scorsese movie, and look at the composition, or an old you know uh, John Huston movie, like you can watch old movies, new movies, and pick up on styles the same way. I think in your work as in animation, from your notes, from film study, it's still that same discipline. Um, and it is maybe a bit harder to have that one-on-one relationship. It's kind of tough to get that anyway, because in an animation studio, nobody really has a lot of time to take you under their wing. People are generally busy and a bit self-absorbed, so it's tough to it's tough to really land a mentor.
Yeah.
I was lucky. I was lucky to get Scott Gerald's in the early part of my career. Scotty was a huge mentor for me, and then he introduced me to his mentor Iwo Takamoto, who designed Scooby-Doo, and Iwo became my mentor. So I had the great benefit of having two dear friends and two dear mentors out of the deal. And they were kind enough to beat me up for 10 years, as I stumbled my way through the Scoobyverse.
Yeah, Scott's a huge fan of Scooby, so I imagine working on Scooby, he's one of the best people to work with.
Hands down, Scott's one of the greatest directors in animation ever. I'd learned a ton from Scott. I was on his storyboard crew when I first got started, and I learned so much from Scott. And sort of that same thing I was just talking about, looking for the same basic core things, like what makes something work when it's clean and when it works. And we had spent years and years working together and had a ball. And I think made some great entertainment together. And then, through association, Scott getting to know Iwo, and what Iwo would look for, and how he approached design and how he approached Scooby and what was important, to the work. I mean, I always say that there is sometimes in life you're in a golden era and you know it. Like people say, "Oh, I didn't know." No, I totally knew that, this was a golden era. Like this 2001 to 2003, like 2 year period there right before Iwo passed was like this is the, greatest era ever. And it was so short and sweet, but it was epic.
It's awesome that you got to experience that.
I'll never forget.
Yeah. Speaking of storyboarding, the first Scooby-Doo storyboard you did was for Scooby-Doo and the Alien Invaders. The earliest storyboard credit that you have online is for Road Rovers, but the first one you actually did was for Superman, is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, and that's thanks to Scott. Again, Scott Gerald. Scott was directing he was directing the second episode of a three-part Superman. The very first, the first three episodes of Superman, the animated series, were sort of a feature. They're a combined one big story, the origin story, and Scotty was directing the second episode. And so I was an assistant at that time, sitting outside his office answering phones, but I was drawing all the time, trying to get noticed and trying to get a shot. And there was one sequence that we were just running out of time. It was this whole action sequence where Clark Kent as a teenager like rescues this family from a burning RV. And there's like a demonstration of like this mecha robot that's like blowing things up. Anyway, Scott had this big action sequence. All the storyboard guys were busy, and there was just sort of a chink in the armor. There was a section that nobody was covering, and I was like, I'll take it. And so I grabbed that and I storyboarded it. And sweating bullets, because I was really pretty green. I was really green. But I got through this sequence, and it made it into some highlight reels actually, which were kind of funny. They were showing around the studio, and anyway, that was sort of my first on screen, performance of, okay, I generally can do this. I was very, very wet behind the ears, but that was the beginning. And then Road Rovers took off right after that, and I jumped on. And when Road Rovers started, it was another production at the company, right? So Superman was going, and then Scott jumped over to Road Rovers, and I went with him, and that's where I started. I think I was a storyboard apprentice. I probably started as a storyboard apprentice for 6 months and worked my way up. And then, superhero dogs with, human bodies and dog heads, flying dog jet planes was fantastic. Another Tom Ruger project, by the way, that, Tom Ruger from Animaniacs and Tiny Toons, et cetera, et cetera. that was his show as well. So, you know, a fun, it's a funny, I'll talk about that for just a second. Road Rovers is a funny show because it actually um, required both disciplines, both general disciplines of storyboarding and storytelling, which was, it was an action show, but it was a comedy show. And so you had to stage for comedy when it was a comedy bit, and you had to stage for action when it was an action bit. And a lot of times those things don't really cross. There's guys and gals who just specialize in action staging and dramatic storytelling, and then people who just specialize in sort of comedy bits and doing goofy stuff. And it was a great fit for getting ready to do Scooby, DVD movies, in that we sort of did both. We'd have sort of action sequences, and then we'd have dynamic staging, and then we'd cut over for some comedy. So in a way, Road Rovers, I thought, always felt Road Rovers prepared me beautifully to have a pretty flexible approach to being able to work in this industry. I've never really done sort of straight action stuff. There are people just so far better than me at that. If anybody wants to come into this industry as a young person and be an action show storyboard artist, they're gonna win it before I'll ever win it. That's for sure. That's not where I shine. But that's a talent and a gift all of itself to stage those kind of shows. I find myself generating, leaning more towards comedy, but Scooby was always the sweet spot. It was like comedy and action and silly gags. And what I'm doing on Thomas and Friends, All Engines Go from Mattel right now is actually very much like Scooby. It's songs, it's gags, it's fun, it's action, it's trains racing around. It's a delightful little show, and I couldn't be having more fun. But it reminds me so much of my Scooby days because it's right back in that sort of sweet spot.
Were your kids into Thomas growing up?
Yeah, my son, when he was probably 2 or 3, 4, we would lay out, I got all the time, long before I ever got close to working on Thomas. We bought a bunch of Thomas stuff. We bought $1,000 worth of Thomas. We went off on Thomas. And so we had the lighthouse and the harbor and the toll booth and the power station and we had, and the drawbridge, like we had it all.
Yeah.
And the mine cart and the loop-de-loop mountain, like we went nuts, right? I loved it, and so did he. So we would lay out our whole living room, and we would just play, for hours. We'd just play Thomas. And so funny, like now, if we're sitting around trying to think of Thomas stories, I will put my brain back there and I'll just think, what was fun about it? And half it's just these trains are just chugging down the track, doing their thing, delivering their thing, come over here, and then you have a little adventure. And so I put my brain back in that spot when we're thinking of stories and try to recapture that playful um you know center of what makes Thomas tick. Why is it such a delightful little world?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My son was obsessed with Thomas. Like you, we spent thousands of dollars. We still have it all. We have the train table and all the tracks and all the trains. And it was like the only thing he ever wanted to play with. And he would sit and play and make different tracks for hours and hours. And he just loved it so much.
Yeah. Yeah. It's something about that little plucky little train. And I think there's some statistic, Mattel let me know that by the age of 1, if they're gonna have a train toy, it's probably gonna be a Thomas. Most little kids are gonna have a Thomas. And part of what's joyful about it is that they're small and they can sort of fit in your hand. You can kind of take them with you, right?
Yeah.
So kids will travel around with Thomas, or they might have a Percy, or they might have a Gordon, they might pick their character.
And
But
they
it's
were
been
very sturdy toys because
Oh
they
yeah.
would. So,
Yeah,
I
right.
never felt like I had to worry about it falling apart or anything.
For sure, right? Yeah, they're big and clunky and chunky, and it's very durable and sturdy and fun. And I think the design sensibility of it, it's very open design, it's very charming and colorful, and simple and yet elegant in its design. I think those toys were all really nicely designed and fun. Um, Sort of just a fun design sensibility about them, very inviting and charming. And we tried to keep that alive as we made the new show. Like, make sure we keep everything, that's so charming about this as we're rebooting this thing to be No, reboot is the right word. It's a re-envisioning and a reimagining of that world, and trying to keep what's great about it, and you know take it in a fun direction.
Sticking with Thomas, how does working on a program aimed at a younger audience compare to other shows that you've worked on? And does it present more challenges, or is it more straightforward and simple?
Yeah, it presents challenges. Just me personally, I tend to write a little older, right? So if I'm writing or putting notes in the script, and I might shoot above the age range a little bit sometimes. And so I have a fantastic executive at Mattel. Her name is Monica Dennis. She runs preschool for Mattel Children's Television, and she this Thomas series we're doing is as much her vision as it is mine. We really did it together, and she has a couple of preschool kids in her house, which is helpful. She's got the in-house focus group, but she really understands that audience. She really has her finger in the pulse developmentally of where they're at. And so she sort of helps keep me in check a little bit, that where I need to think. So I've learned a ton about that age group working with her. And then, I guess I've been able to bring sort of my creative sensibility to it, and to play into how we might, stage a little bit of danger, and have something feel a little more dynamic. So it's sort of this sweet area of making sure it's simple enough, and the stories are straightforward, and we stage it in a way that we don't ever lose track of who the characters are, and you don't lose track of their perspective. And we're always careful about, not being sort of dismissive or offhand about a statement or someone's feelings, or steamrolling over a moment that in an older cartoon might just play cynical. You might let something go, or it might have a different tone. To rein it back and go, no, no, let's be really, at every instant, let's be thoughtful about what we're saying here, and how our audience will interpret this moment, and that we don't want to lose them, and we want to always make it feel that they're with us and they're with Thomas. And so, to not sort of extrapolate out, or bounce the camera out to a wide shot, or cut away to something, where somebody might feel lost for a second. And we don't ever want to have a character, or have an audience member feel like they've lost the character. They're not with the character anymore. So sweet, thoughtful things like that have really been enlightening, I think, for me, working with Monica, to put my brain in that space. And then I'm, communicating that to our director, and our animation team, who handle all of the actual animating of the shows, like, all of us to be able to follow that lead, because everyone can sort of take that leap of how you might stage it, based on maybe work you had done for an older audience. You really do have to bring it to a preschool audience. Not that it has to be dumbed down in any way. It just has to be kind of more thoughtfully engineered. So it's kind of like creating more empathy for your audience, and really, always remembering who's watching it, as opposed to, oh, this is the thing I think I'd like to see, because that's your instinct, as to, oh, this is what I would do. And I do this, bang, 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 bang. Aren't I so brilliant? And you go, wait, wait, wait. Yeah, maybe, but you've lost, this audience, this 3-year-old audience. They would need it a little bit, in a little different syntax. So it's very kind of humbling, and educational, to pull it back and go, okay, this is a thoughtful yet still clever way of staging it, and making it feel engaging. So we have that conversation constantly.
Have you ever had the opportunity to see the real Thomas the Train?
I did. We did a day with Thomas, like a day when my son was young. It was mind blowing, right? It's bigger than
Yeah,
life. It's just
yeah.
like huge, right? Yeah, we
Seeing
did.
it in person is just like,
Uh,
wow. Like,
right?
even for the adults, it's just incredible. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You've worn a number of different hats in the animation industry: producer, director, storyboard artist, and so on. Each job comes with its own distinct challenges, but also its own unique sense of satisfaction or gratification. Which of the job titles you've held did you feel was the most difficult or challenging, and which for you personally was the most fun and rewarding?
Definitely the most challenging was directing, writing and directing on Loch Ness, Scooby-Doo and the Loch Ness Monster, which was my first movie. We only had 9 months to produce it instead of the usual year. So it was a very accelerated schedule, and we were sort of going forward without a script. And so I was up all night writing script pages and handing them to the I mean we had a script, but we were changing it, we were making adjustments. And so I had storyboard guys that were coming in the next day, and I would be up late at night trying to literally laying track right before the train on that production. And there was just a moment. It's 3:30 in the morning. I'm crying at my desk. I'm so emotionally overwhelmed. I'm exhausted and I've got miles to go. But I did think to myself, oh, this is the sweet spot. If I care enough to be here crying at my desk at 3:30 in the morning, if I can make it through this, and I'm self-selecting here to be the person that shows up the most to try to make this work. And so, that's in a way has served me my whole career to go, oh, if I care more and I'm willing to cry at my desk at 3:30 in the morning, almost everything else will work out. And there's a moment where it starts to tip over and you're, oh, it's not going to be a total disaster. It's going to work out. And then movie magic kind of kicks in. And then all of a sudden, and Loch Ness remains one of my favorite, if not my favorite movie I ever did, maybe my favorite thing I ever did. It was my first one, but it was also just sometimes things just come together. And the animation team knocked out of the park, and the production team, and everybody delivered. It was just personally really tough because we were on a tight schedule. It was my first thing. All the stress was there, and that it was just there was a lot of hard moments, and that was one of the hardest. But it was also it's a moment I remembered to this day, and has served me really, really well to go, okay, this is, sometimes crying at your desk at 3:30 in the morning is the solution, and that's okay. You know, sometimes that's the price. That's the price of making something. And I always think in terms of, there's this short little window of time to produce the thing, and then it's gone. Then you have to go make it, and it's done. They lock it. You can't keep noodling on it. This isn't like feature where we spend 2.5 years thinking about it. We spent 16 weeks getting it done, and you have to make your decision and go. And so I always think of that window is so short. And so, there's this little period of time in which you can affect the outcome, like raising kids. It's like this little period of time when you can affect the outcome. So you got to go when it's going. So that was the hardest, maybe the hardest thing I ever worked on, but that had the biggest impact and the best outcome, because from there we did 5 more Scooby movies, and it just rolled on. And with better schedules. And then my favorite thing I've ever done. Might be Loch Ness too. What if it's the same? They're the hardest and the
That's
favorite.
fine.
Might be the best thing. Yeah. I'm proud. Well, I'm really proud of Loch Ness too, because we got it done, and then it actually got nominated for an Annie, and we went to the Annie Awards, and it was up there with that year it was Lion King 2, which produced by Disney, and I think there was a Pixar short. There was something or something else. I forget what it was, but there was a couple, it was in a category with other projects that had oodles more time and money spent. And they showed a clip at the Ennies, they showed a clip of all the movies. And they showed the scene from Loch Ness when the monster's at the window with the red eyes, and the CG monster roars at Shannon Blake, which is sort of a callback to the Amityville horror movie from the 70s, which freaked me out. I literally was calling back that scene. And it's sort of in my career, at least, a famous scene, because I always hear from parents say, "Oh my gosh, my toddler screamed and leaped and hid behind the couch, but then he poked up and he wanted to see what happened next." This fun, scary, dinosaur-y kind of moment. They showed that at the Annies. They showed that as the clip, and the whole audience kind of went back in their chairs, and they didn't realize Scooby could be that. And I thought
Mm.
that was kind of a cool moment. So that those two things, we didn't win the Annie that night, but I felt honored to be in the company we were in, and that we had achieved something. And yeah, I was pretty proud of that moment, and then I blinked and 20 years went by.
For Loch Ness Monster, you were producer, director, writer, character designer, and storyboard artist. It seems like a lot of roles for one movie. What was it like to be in all of these different roles for one movie, and was it difficult to go from one mindset to the other?
Well, it was like being pulled apart by wild dogs. And that's what I always say directing is. If you want to be an animation director, you're going to be making a decision every 30 seconds on something. And it's going to be a wild pack of dogs is tearing you apart. That's just how it is. And those, in each of those instances, like particularly character designer, I sketched things out and then fabulous character designers like Kathy Castillo took over. And Kathy Castillo, who worked on all of my Scoobies with me, if most of them, she was fabulous. And then Jim Stenstrom, who also was character designer on a number of my Scooby movies. Um, that they're both a perfect example of working with incredible designers who I would do a very rough sketch and then they would be able to just take it and add so much character and form and structure and shape to it and thoughtfulness. So, I don't want to overstate my character design credit. But a lot of times, the I guess the advantage that I had or generally have is I usually know what I want or some version of it. And so as long as you know what you want, I always say this to directors, like as long as you know what you want, you're fine. It's when if people who say, I don't know what I want, but I know it when I'll see it, you're dead. It's never going to work and you're going to drive your crew crazy and you're going to go over budget and you don't have time to decide what you want later. You really got to direct. You got to ask people for something specific, and then you let them bring something to the table, and then 9 million times out of 10, they will bring you something better than what you had in mind. And you might have a note on it, like this is kind of that, a kind of little, but you'll adjust it. You'll just nibble on it. Like this could be that. Get rid of this. I kind of, oh, I like that. Do that. Do that, but flip that around to this side. What about that? And you kind of work on it together. So it's kind of a combination of being pulled apart by wild dogs, but also like fun, collaborative. I was, another thing I say is like every day is Christmas, right? Every day is like someone's bringing you a design, a background, a thing, and it's like, either you got socks or you got the thing you really wanted more than anything. And if you got socks, that's okay. You kind of work with it. Like not everything that you get shown is like what you want, and you're kind of like, that's not really what I had in mind. Or, what were you kind of thinking here? Let's find a way to figure out where this needs to be. So, all those different hats, were different disciplines. And since they all serve the same purpose, popping from one to the other, especially when things are really rolling, like you got board locked down and you're really going forward in design and you really know what you're trying to get, then what you're actually seeing week by week is the realization and manifestation of your vision, and it starts to connect, and then all of a sudden you get that critical mass. You're like, oh, this is really great. Like we've really got all the pieces. I've seen now 3 or 4 of the main parts of the movie in terms of production design and where look development is going, and it looks like it's coming together. It feels cohesive, and you reach that moment where it's not being pulled apart by dogs anymore. You're looking forward to coming into the studio every day because you're just excited about the next stuff that you're going to see and working with the team. So probably the loneliest is writing. You're just by yourself and you're pulling your hair out and you're trying to think of bits and what will work and how, but you're also thinking about how you can guide your artists and your production designers, so that they have really clear descriptions the minute that the script lands on their desk. So I always think in those terms of, even though writing is the most lonely part, it's actually you're setting yourself up to have a much better experience in production by giving your I always think of an animation script is a really specific blueprint. It's not just dialogue and description. It's like I'm actually writing a love letter to my designers and my directors so that they know, rainy night outside a stormy castle, blues and greens, as the puddles form, in a muddy, sloppy road leading up to a crumbling gate, something that's descriptive and visual so that they're not just doesn't just say stormy night castle, give them the vibe, and so that was always kind of fun, at least even though it was lonely, it's you're setting yourself up, and then when you get there, and then one of the greatest things I ever hear is a designer says, oh, I get exactly what I'm supposed to do. Let me go try this. And then they bring you something that's like totally mind-blowing, like Jeff Purvis, who did the designs of the Goblin King Castle and Goblin King. Like I did this kind of rough sketch for him, and he came back and just brought this fantastic freaking, design for that. Or Tristan Cole, who has done just tons and tons of background paintings and production design. Her paintings of Blake Castle in Loch Ness, and her paintings of the monastery and in Chill Out. I mean, like, just nonstop hitting it out of the park. Tristan always hits it out of the park. So then it just becomes a delight, right? Like, it just starts becoming and it becomes, again, very humbling, because you're like, oh my gosh, like, people are just absolutely killing it. From my stupid little sketch that I can barely produce with my little claw hand. I'm just forcing some sort of a design out to give them a general direction. Or Edgar Carlos, who's a fantastic background designer, and Edgar always comes through with something amazing. And the list goes on of just fabulous people. But that's the best part of it, of being a producer or a director, is that you actually you surround yourself with a really great crew of people who are just so much better than you at specific areas, and your job is to sort of bounce across the top of them. I always like to say that, my job was to be sort of mediocre in all the areas, but at least have a working knowledge of it, and then I can tie it together. And by the time you get to post-production with a good editor, then you're just, you're sitting on a couch, and somebody who's really good at what they do is taking it all, and you're sitting there trying to recover from the whole experience, and put the thing together and make something out of it. And then, then you deliver, and the process starts all over again. We say, if it's pinball, it's like pinball. If you win, you play again. Yeah. So you start back at the beginning, if you're lucky.
You
Right.
brought up Tristan.
Yeah.
She's shown us some pictures that you guys have all drawn of each other,
Oh.
and like silly pictures. And you always draw her as a duck. Why a duck? She couldn't tell me why.
I think I was just screwing around. I was just screwing around with some version of a caricature of her. And I was probably started out as some, I don't know, some Simpsons or something. I was just trying to figure out, like, how to draw her. Then I think I just gave her an overbite just for fun. Sort of like the Life in Hell, Matt Groening, like this rabbit's got this kind of overbite with the 3 teeth. I think I went that direction with it. And then it just went crazy. We just started, like, playing with it. Like anything, like any gag drawing, if you get someone's goat a little bit, then you gotta keep going and digging in on that nerve, right? So I think it didn't start as a duck; it ended up just as a duck. Yeah, it was extended overbite.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, but those kind of gag drawings, that's another thing that you really miss not being in a studio, because it's just, I mean, just the ridiculous amounts of creativity flying over the walls at a studio, with just people having fun with each other, back and forth, gag drawings. That is a fantastic long history of gag drawings in our industry that people just do out of love and humor for each other. And that's another thing that's lost by not being in proximity and in a studio together. You just, someone putting a post-it note on your desk. I mean, every day with usually an avalanche of gags or bits and just hilariousness from 1 hour to the next. And that's those days I truly miss. Now it's just emails. Oh, I just look at
Which
emails.
isn't the same, I'm
It's
sure.
not even close to. Yeah, c'est la vie.
So Wendy, my co-host, says that this is the single most important question that we ever ask people on the panels. Are you a Scrappy-Doo fan or not?
I have grown to understand Scrappy-Doo. I've made peace with Scrappy-Doo. We put a gag in Goblin King where the monster machine crashes through the Mr. Machine, which has become the Monstrous Machine, crashes through a kiosk of Scrappy-Doo plush dolls, and the Scrappies are torn to shreds, and in his jaws of his gaping maw. We did that sort of as a gag, obviously. As a kid, I hated Scrappy-Doo with a passion. As an adult, I understand and having, got to know and meet the guys who put him in the show, like, trying to continue to grow the franchise in the 70s of what television was and how things were, were developing then at that point, keeping Scooby going on the 6th or 7th season of stuff. You're mid 1970s at this point. What do you do to keep it fresh? Scooby Dum and Dynamite and Scrappy Doo. He was, you got to take him in context. He was part of an era. But no, I don't care for Scrappy Doo.
I get the point for that one, Wendy. My point. I do not like Scrappy either. I can tolerate him in certain things, but I
Right.
prefer that he's not there. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. But, it is what it is. It was of its time.
Right.
And yeah. What's Wendy? Wendy's a Scrappy Doo fan.
Oh,
You guys
Wendy
are loving it.
loves Scrappy.
See? Scrappy
Loves
did it.
him.
It's great.
Yes.
Did his job.
Yes. And
Yeah.
we talked to Charles Grosvenor, and he brought up how, Mickey Mouse had his 3 nephews and Popeye had his 3 nephews. I'm just thankful that there was only one Scrappy and not 3.
Oh, that's very funny. Right? There could have been 3. Oh my God.
There could have been 3.
I never did the math on that. Wow. We dodged a bullet,
Yes.
Nikki. It could have been so much worse.
It could have been so much worse. Yes.
Well, you tell Wendy for me that she has every right, and I will not hold it against her. I would never cast aspersion on where anybody gets their joy. Just don't invite me to your Scrappy themed birthday party.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you worked at Warner Brothers, Disney, and DreamWorks. Did you prefer one studio over the other, or were they similar atmospheres?
They were totally different. And they're different eras, so it's kind of tough to put your finger on in each era. It's really the people that you work with. It isn't even the environment or whether or not they had lunch or or the offices you were working in. It's the people that you're working with and the projects that you're working on. Each one of them, my Warner years were golden years, like fabulous formative years, and you couldn't ask for a better run than that. And then it was time to leave. I left and floated around. I was able, I was able to go. I went from Warner's to Bento Box on the first season of Bob's Burgers, and um, that was Joel Kuhara and his partners were started their own animation studio. So it was exciting to be in the ground floor of a startup studio, and Lauren Bouchard, who did Bob's Burgers, to get, I was a fan of his Dr. Katz therapist shorts and series. And so, working with those people were amazing. And I was only there for about 2 years at Bento Box. And then I got to DreamWorks on the Dragon series. And that was a different group of people and a different, you go from sort of a startup little, almost garage band, feel of a studio to a big established, major studio with a big franchise that's doing a TV version of a major franchise. So different players and different concerns and different atmosphere, and vibe. But I was brought over there by Marge Dean, who now runs Women in Animation, and she's also the head of Skybound Entertainment, or their animation division, doing all the Invincibles. Marge is a fantastic person. Have you had Marge on the? You got to reach out to Marge Dean. She has been a foundational member of the animation community, and so many people over the years have been helped and worked with Marge. She was my producing partner on quite a number of my Scoobies, and we did What's New Scooby-Doo together. Marge was amazing. And so she brought me in at DreamWorks. Wild Brain and DreamWorks were co-producing the series together, blah, blah, blah. That was a challenging show for a lot of people. It turned out great, ended up being a really great show. We won an Annie Award for that, for show I directed there. I didn't last very long there. I was there for about a year, and we sort of butted heads a little bit. So, with the creative team, I'm as much to blame for it as anyone. It all worked out, and I went and I produced Xiaolin Chronicles. It ended up on Disney XD, which is how I got noticed by Disney to go over there to Disney. And I was part of their interactive labs team. So actually, it was an executive position as a director of development working in their interactive labs. And so it was thinking about how technology and entertainment and classic storytelling all merge and mesh together. This is 2013, so it's 10 years ago. But that was an exciting group. It was an exciting team. My boss there was a fantastic guy named Kyle Laughlin, and he's actually just ended up back at Disney now. He put together this team under Jimmy Pitaro, who now runs ESPN. They were running interactive, and they put together this labs team to explore new technologies, virtual reality, mixed reality, games, animation, to see where it all kind of comes together. And it was a wild time because the Muppet Studio also landed at our offices right there. So we were doing Muppets, we were doing, we were doing development for Pixar, and we were doing, our own projects. We were developing Oswald at the time. And so, I was able to recruit just the most fantastic team, and we all still keep in contact together. We call it, without a joke, saying best team ever. Like, there's just the best team you'd ever want. And so we had a 4-year run over there, and we produced The Legend of the Three Caballeros, which is on Disney Plus, and then we did Muppet Babies for Disney Junior. Out of all the stuff that we produced, those were the stuff that we developed. We developed a ton of stuff, but those were the two things that got through. It was a great era. It was also a frustrating era because we were supposed to be able to sell to the streaming services. That was the whole point of what we were doing. And then right then they decided to come up with Disney Plus, and we sort of got caught in the gears of strategic decision making of what was the company going to do and what would they do with somebody like us who's in tech, and yet we can produce traditionally. And so, in each of these eras, there's the people you're working with, which is fantastic. There's the business concerns, which are frustrating sometimes. There can be a clash, and it's not right or wrong. It simply is what it is. It's part of just the grist of the mill of the entertainment industry itself. So, I have a lot of warmth for every person and every experience along the way. It's made me the person that I am in so many ways. And, failures and successes, it's led to being able to do my independent projects and companies that I'm running now. Some of whom my guys from Disney. I mean, my whole thing has been putting the band back together. So I've got three of my original four. No, four. I've got four. As of right now, four of my core four guys from my Disney team are all working with me in some capacity in our new endeavors. They're just this week signed the fourth guy. So I'm on my way to having enough capital that we can actually launch our full studio and put the band back together again. The running joke is 7 years ago, I said, guys, I'm going to go get us some money. I'll be right back. I'm going to start my own studio. And it's harder than it sounds. But so long-winded answer to your question. Each era has its challenges and it's great memories. But every bit of it's been a piece of the puzzle. And what we solved at Disney was, with a very small, really super talented team, tightly connected with each other, partnered with outside animation studios all over the world, we can actually be really effective. And if we're just given the lanes and the capital to execute, nobody can stop us. So that's that model that we proved there was sort of an experimental model. People would come into our lab at Disney and be like, how is this the team that's doing all the stuff that we just saw? Like, where it looked like a group of people that, there were probably 12 people, I think, on the team at our highest point. We were not a studio of 200 people, and yet we were producing all this stuff. Well, it's because we were sort of a centralized hub, and then we partnered with fantastic animation studios all over the planet. And so that was the secret sauce, and that's how we're organizing our companies now. And so we proved the model at Disney, and now we're executing it on our own companies with each other.
Great that you have the people back with you that were working with you, and I'm sure to you it's a relief because you were successful with them at Disney or whatever studios you worked with them at. So I'm sure you feel like your company will hopefully share that same success because you trust the people that you have working with you.
Absolutely. We have such a functional familiarity and trust with each other that it's very, we can move very quickly. Everybody executes at a really high level. Everybody knows their lane. Everybody gets along, communicates really cleanly. I jokingly say we're a 7-year overnight success because it took this long to kind of put the model together. But we are getting traction and growing that company and seeing early success now. And so it's all about, can you put together a model where you're able to bring the team together? And it doesn't matter, you know, whether we're doing our independent companies or even in the days at Warner Brothers and at Disney, you're just always fighting quarter to quarter. You're fighting to keep the team together. You know, that's the other, back to where we kind of started our conversation. The other cyclical aspect of the animation industry is you're on a great team on a great project. You'll look around and go, I couldn't imagine more talented people working together in a more beautiful way. How can you just let this go? And the reality is that there's not another production. There's no money. There's the company or the studio or the distribution company hasn't ordered more episodes yet. And they, you know, it's not that they don't want to keep you going, if they just cannot afford to pay you. And so the team goes away. And so it's almost like summer camp. You'll meet these people that you'll live and die with, and you'll swear friendship and fidelity and loyalty for the rest of your days. And then you don't see them again for 20 years. You know, they just get blown to the wind. And it's the saddest, worst part of it all. And that's part of why I wanted to start a company, because I want to keep my summer camp together. I want to keep my team. That's what I always wanted to do. Like, how can we keep this group going? Because how rare is it to catch, you know, have a company that, or have a group of people that know how to put lightning in bottles? Like, we're bottling lightning and we're going to just let that go. That can't happen. So that's been the driver.
That's great. You've used animation to educate people on how to make healthy choices with a series called How to Eat Foods That Make You Happy. Can you tell us how that came to be and give us more information on the project itself?
Sure. So when I left Disney, I was chewed up and spit out. I was so stressed out and worn out by the process of no, not there was anything at all wrong with Disney. It was just the long road of how we were going to operate inside the company, and it reorganized the last year we were there, and we weren't doing the same things anymore. It was sort of a long unwind. Luckily, we got Muppet Babies produced and on its way, and that was a huge win. Went on to win Emmys, and you have great success and be a great show, everything they wanted it to be. But behind the scenes, you know, it was sort of a time of transition at that company. And by the time I left, I needed a break. So I took time off, and I went, I rented a studio, and I went, what am I going to work on? Like, I'm going to just do my own thing now. I'm going to start, said to my guys, I'll be right back. I'm going to go find us some money. I thought, what projects will it be? And I realized I really needed to get myself physically healthy and well, and to be sure that I could have the energy to produce these things. And so that came out of just my own study of like, well, first I sort of got to get my health under control, and my stress level under control, and my nutrition under control. And so I started digging into the science of nutrition and realized, oh, you know, so much of our feeling of well-being comes from, you know, the situation within our gut biome, our nerves, within our lower, you know, GI tract, and what foods we're putting in that create energy, and whether or not, you know, we're feeding our brains and bodies the building blocks they need to create new neurons for new neuroplasticity. I really got into this whole world of eating for, you know, I wasn't quite ready to pull the plug and deteriorate into powder just yet. So I wanted to figure out how I could accelerate my physical health and choose a better eating. And then I started to realize, you know, or understand more and more about how serotonin and dopamine are produced, and that, you know, there can be a nutritional element to that as well. So, you know, How to Eat Foods That Make You Happy kind of came out of that. It was actually part of a larger program that I called Six Senses, which was sleep, exercise, nutrition, social media, environment, and storytelling. These are the six key areas that you need to get handled, and if you're going to be able to handle the stress of modern life, and especially handle the influx of AI into our lives. So there's a lot of anxiety and stress over what AI means. So actually, I made Six Senses and how to eat foods that make you happy, came out of a desire to raise my HI, my human intelligence, so that I could contend with AI as it came in. And, you know, AI is, you know, we hear nothing except AI is coming to, you know, eat our lunch and take all of our jobs. And I've been using Six Senses and How to Eat Foods That Make You Happy as a bulwark against that I'm actually contending with AI, going, well, my HI is at its highest level, so I can deal with AI, and I'm going to wield AI as a tool, because this has always been a disruptive industry. This is the next thing to contend with. If it can be contended with, I'll give it a shot. And if I'm going to be successful, I'll need my HI operating at the highest level. So I'll be able to know where I'm coming from and why I'm using it, what my goals are, but also I'll be in touch with myself naturally and at my optimal mental, physical health, and not give over to sort of the digital degradation. That's a big word. It's too big for this morning. That comes, there's a large neural downgrading, downshifting that our brains do if we spend too much time in digital environments and online and social media and things. And so that, understanding the brain chemistry behind that and building this system and this program. And so for a couple of years I was doing that, I actually was pursuing those things because I was like, I can't do any of the other things I'm going to do if I can't get this locked down. And then I put that program together and I was going to go promote it and put it out. And then I realized I don't really want to be anybody's health guru. That's not really what I came here to do. So I sort of unplugged it and I tucked it away and it's still there. And I hand it out to people every now and then if somebody feels that they're really stressed out. But what the funny thing for me is that it's my secret sauce. All the things that I'm doing, people are often asking me, like, how am I operating in all these different areas that I'm doing now? One is they're all super novel and interesting and challenging. So I'm not bored. I have plenty to do, but on just the sheer workload and the grind of the day-to-day hustle of it all, six senses and eating the right foods, keeping track of sleep, exercise, nutrition, staying off social media if I can, really being careful and clear about my environment, what environments I'm in and what's happening inside my internal environment, which nutrition is a part of. And then just understanding my own personal story of why I'm doing the things I'm doing. Those things have helped me, it's funny because I always thought, what'll be the proof that this is any good? And I'm like, well, if I am able to execute in all these areas, all these projects that I want to do, I put these bulletin boards up and had all these projects all around my room. Which of these am I going to pick? And I picked the key ones, before I die, I could probably get these done. How am I going to even do all these? I had to be at some better level than where I was. So now that I'm firing in so many cylinders, I always point back to that and I always return to it. And I'm not a saint, I'm not perfect on these things, but they're protocols that I use that, get enough sleep, get enough exercise. Those are no-brainers, right? But the social media piece is really big, the nutrition piece is really big, the environment piece, like they're all super important. So those were just things that I knew worked for me. But that was probably about a 2-year period that I took off. I finished my MBA. I went and got an MBA, so that I could handle some of the business, understand the business aspects, of sort of what I could better understand what happened at Disney and why Disney was doing what they were doing, but also understand my own industry better. So I took those 2 years, finished my MBA, finished Six Senses and how to eat foods that make you happy. And then when that was done, hit reset, and right about that time is when I got an opportunity to go to Mattel and produce on Thomas. And so I came back to the industry on Thomas. And then I've just been going gangbusters ever since. It's been 4 years ago.
That's great. And it's great that you were able to find those things that would help you.
Well, that was my thing, is like, this just works for me. It may not work for everybody. And when I share it, I occasionally I'll do like an 8-week sort of private Zoom. I'll lead people through it if they're interested. And I just did one. I only do it like once a year. Who has time? But I just did one with a wonderful group of old friends who were all interested, and everybody seemed to get a lot out of it. But I always say it's not really about like changing everything in your life. It's like, make those little changes that make that ripple in the pond, that little pebble in the pond. And then a few changes, you can actually start to make a pretty big effect across your sort of stress levels and things. So yeah. If anybody's actually interested in Six Senses, I could share out, some of it, or could share out the password and stuff to you. If people really are interested, I try not to just give it away. I don't really want to just throw it out there, but if someone's really, really interested, and I don't charge anybody for it, and I'm not trying to make money on it, but it's special. So I try to give it to people who are going to use it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. You're currently working on a series of animated shorts produced by Public Pixels Media. What is it about, and how did you get involved in the project, and what is your role on the project?
Yeah, so Public Pixels Media is a company we started this year to produce specifically for nonprofits or government agencies because my other company, VRI Studios, which is a company we started about 2 years ago, we had produced we had an offer to come in to produce this animated series for the state of California. They have a $14 billion fund called the Home Care Based Services Fund. It's HCBS is the acronym, because it's government and government loves acronyms. And the idea is that it's instead of 30 or 40 years ago, people lived in institutions or hospitals or whatever, now they live in a home. Anybody who's, if you have autism or cerebral palsy or Down syndrome or MS, like any sort of developmental disability, that you can live in a house in a neighborhood, and you can go to the grocery store whenever you want. You can have people over to your house. You can, you have the right to live your life the way everyone has a right to live their life. And it's a fantastic program. But the trick is the people who receive services, who live in these houses and are receiving the services from the California Department of Disabilities, the DDS, Department of Developmental Services, DDS. So they have certain rights that nobody really knows about. Your rights are in a book that's this thick. It's like reading the telephone book, right? And the people who are providing the services, there's vendors who run these houses and take care of the residents who live there, and they have certain rules and things they need to understand about what the rights are. And so there's sort of the 10 commandments of those rules. It's called the HCBS Final Rule, and it's a series of 10 distinct rights that everyone has. Right to privacy, your right to have access to the community. List goes on and on. And through one of my dear friends, who's a movie producer named Mark Wolf, who was the former CEO of Reading Rainbow for 10 years with LeVar Burton. Mark came to me, and he sits on the board of the regional centers, which are there's 21 regional centers throughout California who provide these services, and there's I think 400,000 people in the system total. And they had to come to him, since he's from Hollywood as a movie producer, said, do you know anybody who does animation? We'd like to see if we could come up with a project. Diva Johnson is the name of the executive producer out of the Santa Barbara Regional Center, whose baby this was. It was her idea. She's a director up there at the regional center, and this was her idea of what they could do with their funding that year to get communication out to the community. So Diva contacted Mark. Mark contacted me and said, hey, you think you could produce something like this? And we looked at it and we said, yeah, it's really rough. The price point at which a nonprofit and a state agency would produce is nothing like a Netflix show, and nothing like anything we would do at Disney, but maybe we could figure it out. And one of my guys from Disney, producer director named Mark Baldo, who's fantastic. Mark had just finished a project with a animation studio in Brazil named Split Animation. They had just done a kind of nonprofit project called My Life is Worth Living. It was about teenage suicide, and they'd done a beautiful job on it, a really tight budget. And so I went to Mark and said, hey, do you think we could put together a pipeline? You could come in and produce, and we can use Split as our animation studio, and we can work with the state, and we'll figure this thing out. And along with Mark, we brought in Matt Chapman, who was also with me at Disney. Matt came on as our other producer, and he sort of handles more of the post-production back end, but also does creative on the front end too. And between Mark and Matt and myself and the Split Animation Studio, we were able to, by the seat of our pants, produce 20 episodes, 25-minute episodes of this thing called the HCBS Final Rule animated series, and a whole fun cast of characters, putting it into situational sort of sitcom-y, bits that were in a story sense, a story in a story structure, laying out what the rules were. So we're not just talking about what the rules are, but show you a little fun little story of some kind of zany characters that will, have fun with the material. And, and we actually were able to get actors who have autism to voice the characters. And so we wanted really, to be as authentic as we could in our casting and give opportunities for people from that community to voice these characters. We also got RJ Mitty, who was the son of Walter White Jr. in Breaking Bad. He came on to voice one of our main characters, who has cerebral palsy. And so he was fantastic. And so it's just sort of one of these things that comes together. We produced it for next to nothing, um, under our banner of VRI Studios last year. And then the state saw it, the state of California saw it, loved it. They said, we want to do a bunch more. And we said, wait. We can't keep living like this. It's all too much. But we can make a company that's specifically just for this kind of work. And so we split and made Public Pixels Media, which is a second company now, that I'm running that's just for this kind of work. Where VRI Studios, we sold a project to Amazon, an option. We sold an option to Amazon. We picked up the rights to a mid-grade book series that's a hit, by Tom Phillips, who's one of our writers, who is our writer, I should say, on the HCBS Final Rule series. We worked at Reading Rainbow with Mark, so it's all the same people working together with each other, going, what about this? What about that? Let's get this. We optioned Tommy's book. We're developing that for a Netflix series, right? So we're over here doing in VRI Studios. We're over here doing stuff for Hollywood, and then Public Pixels. We're over here doing stuff for the government, and we're able to develop. Those are two different kind of worlds, and different price points, and different structures. And we picked up 3 new series from the government so far this year, and there's talk of producing a lot more. We're starting gathering steam there, and we started to come up with a model that actually makes it that we don't completely lose our shirts doing nonprofit work. So at the end of the day, the work was super charming. It turned out really great, and Tom and Matt and Mark Wolf, who executive produced it, along with Diva Johnson from the Tri-Counties Regional Center, and then I executive produced it. So I'm an executive producer on that stuff, and really more putting the team together. And I think that's where I've come in running these companies. It's more about putting great teams together, which is what you're really doing as a producer most days anyway. You just want to bring the team together. You're, like I said, mediocre in a lot of areas, but can you put the team together? The MBA helps me track the business aspect of it, so I stare into spreadsheets all day long some days. But then I'm still producing for Thomas, and that I get my creative and kind of pure creative. I'm not responsible for budget projections or financing or tracking or line producing, any of that. I'm just purely doing creative on Thomas, which is such a joy. And then I come over and I do all the business behind the scenes, and structural planning on these 2 companies over here with my business partners. And so it's like both sides of my brain are always firing at some point in my day. And I just collapse in an exhausted heap by 10 o'clock. I'm worthless after 8, and don't try to make me do anything productive after even 4 o'clock. But I start about 5 a.m. So
Wow.
I'm usually on about an hour 11 by the time my brain revolts and says, that's it, shut it down, power it down. But worthless after 8 o'clock, and a zombie at 10, a pumpkin. Yeah.
It does sound like you have a lot going on in a day, so yeah.
Well, these are the days. These are the days, and at some point you're also going, all of these things are opportunities that have popped up because of work I did previously. And there's some part of my brain that goes, there's something of a responsibility to take advantage of opportunities, because you've earned them. You've earned opportunities, and so you gotta convert on them. So it's sort of just like, and over time now that we've been working on these things for so long, it's a great group of people being able to do it. I'm really coordinating more, and it is never ending, certainly never ending. But the worst part is, the I'm the vice, no, what am I? I'm the co-president of my daughter's swim team. If you want to know what takes most of my emotional energy most days, it's the swim team. That's where all my energy is. Everything else is pretty easy. The swim teams, we got to get that thing off my plate someday. But one thing I really wanted to talk about, one thing that I am doing the next 4 weeks, if I can borrow the microphone for a second.
Yeah, absolutely.
Had an opportunity to raise money for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. They're doing their Visionaries of the Year campaign. And what they're doing is this came to me. I'm a cancer survivor. I got Hodgkin's disease back in 1998, and I've always been looking for a way to give back. And it came to me a couple of months ago. I was nominated to be part of this Visionaries of the Year campaign, and they give you 10 weeks to try to raise as much money as you can for lymphoma and leukemia research. And what's very exciting is that what they're doing is they're raising money to fund clinical trials. The science is in. They're running clinical trials now for taking chemotherapy for kids with leukemia and getting rid of it so that they can just have a pill. And I didn't know this, but there are no treatments for leukemia. There are no kid-focused treatments for leukemia. They take adult doses, they take adult treatments and they mini-me them. They downsize them and give them to kids. And later in life, they end up with organ failure, major health problems, and sometimes it kills them. And I heard that, I'm like, that's so unacceptable. And they said, but now the science is actually here that they can get rid of all of that. We can end that barbaric era and we can actually solve it, and they can take a pill instead and like have no side effects. I was like, oh my God, sign me up. What do we do? They said, well, join this Visionaries program. You have 10 weeks, go. And I sat around for 6 weeks going, what's my vision? What am I going to do for 6 weeks? Like you had to bake it, right? And they're like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm thinking. And then last week I figured it out. I created a campaign called 10,000 Heroes. And I'm finding 10,000 people who are willing to donate $100. And that's $1 million. If we can raise $1 million. So in the next 4 weeks, I'm looking to raise $1 million by $100 donations across 10,000 people. I'm also partnered with Mattel's Play It Forward. That's their charitable giving arm through their children's foundation. They don't raise money, but they do a lot of in-kind donations. And they have something called Brave Barbie, which they've given 100,000 Brave Barbies out over 10 years now. They just hit their 10-year anniversary. An amazing program. So they've agreed to partner with me and the LLS. And I'm going out to like corporate sponsorships and driving to try to find people and on the corporate level that are willing to make those kind of donations, while at the private level, personal level, peeling out across all my socials and my whole network, looking for people, anybody, between all of us and everyone, we must know 10,000 people who have been touched by leukemia or lymphoma in some way, are willing to make $100 donation to literally, not just to fund cancer research, but to literally change the world and go to drive clinical trials from chemotherapy to a pill. It's really specific, and the moment is here and now. Because, I mean, we're making stuff for kids all the time. This is all about kids, barbarically being treated by chemotherapy. There's no way we can't somehow leverage this community to raise $100 from 10,000 people around the world. So if you'll help me promote that, I
Yeah,
would.
absolutely.
I'm putting
It's such a
together. I'm
great
putting together.
cause.
You know what it is, and the people at LLS are so great. Like they're the most amazing people, and they've opened my eyes to this, this entire community of doctors and researchers and philanthropists, people doing this work. But also, for 25 years, I've been looking for where my give back is. Where's my lane? Like, I recovered from Hodgkin's disease because of clinical trials. And, people went through that, clinical trials to save my life. I have a life debt that I never was able to pay back. And this dropped into my lap. And so I'm like, all right. So I spent 25 years thinking about it, 6 weeks marinating on it. And now I'm like 4 weeks to go. And like, it's always got to happen in the clutch. I can't do anything without a deadline. So, but it all came through. And like I set my website up this morning. I finished a social media post video last night, which I'd love you to link to. And like, I'm going to be completely annoying and try to be so prolific with this message over the next 4 weeks. Because it is an exciting thing. And I believe in this community. I believe this community can change the world. And so that's what I'm hoping to do. Okay. End of takeover.
I will make a
Awesome.
clip of that. I'll post it on YouTube. I'll post it on all my socials.
Oh, you're the best.
Use it at any point to promote stuff. That's fine. Yeah, we'll get the
Great.
word out. And
Great.
so you won the Humanitas Prize for Children's Animation in May of 2003 for Static Shock. And you talked about winning the Annie Award for Dragons. What was it like for you winning these awards?
Yeah, well, the Humanitas Award was meaningful. It's really a writing award, and I got to give the credit to Alan Burnett and Dennis Cowan, who was the producer and creator of Static Shock. They wanted to do and this was, geez, my gosh, 2002, right? 2003 was when we won. 2002, we produced Static Shock for Kids WB, and we did a gun episode. And it was a really thoughtful approach to a school shooting, and who knew for the next 20 years we would continue to just suffer from this huge affliction. But it was such a thoughtfully well done piece. And the Humanitas, I directed the episode, so I got a Humanitas prize for directing the episode that won for its writing. so I can't take a whole lot of credit other than that I did direct the episode. But winning that was, it was pretty, meaningful and I remember that day, very, very well. And because we had, funny enough, we had been nominated for an Emmy for that episode too. 2 weeks earlier was the Emmy Awards, and we were the very first category, and we didn't win. So it's like we show up, everybody's ready, like, and the night's over. The night is over before it's begun because you're the first category, you didn't win. So 2 weeks later, we're at this thing, and it's announced that we won this humanities award. It was a luncheon, and it was a lovely event. And it was just, super humbling and just and to be there with someone like Alan Burnett. So Alan, was a head executive producer and writer at Warner Brothers for a number of years, especially when I first showed up there, as answering phones. And now, 6, 7 years later, I'm with Alan at a banquet and we're winning the Humanitas Award together. And he wrote on all of the Batman animated series and all of the DC comic stuff and I think, and has even done comedy. I'm sure he did stuff, other things too. Alan's since retired, but he's a fantastic, fantastic head writer. And then he was the head writer on Static Shock. And so, working with him was great. And so it was like anything, it's the people that you're with that make it meaningful. And so, being with him, being with Dennis Cowan, who was the creator of the show and also a director on the series, Dennis is prolific and a celebrated comic artist and writer. So, being within that company, and this is I think it was my first directing gig. It was my first real gig that I got again because Scott Gerald's was producing the show, and Scott put me in there as a director. So I owe so much to Scott. But yeah, it was all about the people that you're with and looking around going, I cannot believe this. I felt like I got beamed on board a spaceship here. Yeah, it was pretty great.
That's awesome. Of everything that you've done, what are you most proud of in your career?
I think now that I'm where I'm at now and seeing the trajectory of things, I'm proud of the work that we've been able to do in this crazy industry. The people that I've had the opportunity to work with, the projects that I've been able to shepherd through or help shepherd through, be a part of. I'm most, I think, proud now that the two companies that I'm leading now are gaining their traction, and it's sort of the culmination of all these years of trying to figure out the whole business as one thing, one ecosystem, one cohesive ecosystem that all works together, and to not tear it apart and go, have the artists going, oh, the bean counters don't care, they're just trying to make money, and have the accountants going, oh, these artists are crazy, they're spending all of our money and they're going over budget. Like, having everyone respect everybody and understand that it actually takes a village to make this work, and to have a comprehensive understanding of it. And in a way, it's very freeing because you're not wasting energy, sort of feeling, like someone's persecuting you or being a victim of the industry. Like, having a full understanding that it's just, it is just a dynamic industry, constantly in flux, populated by the most fabulously talented people struggling to make a living in an environment that is always, undergoing disruption and change. And so I guess I'm proudest of that sort of realization of extrapolated far enough back now that I can see what I think is most of what's to be seen, and understand it better, and then be effective at deploying into it and leading these companies with that understanding. So my energy isn't sort of wasted, in places that it's not useful. And then here comes, this massive disruption of AI to try to handle and get wrangled. So you're always, always growing, never sitting still, and managing to keep it together as you're sort of always under this sort of influence of the unknown and the instability of it. But that's life. Life is an unstable and unpredictable, experience. So kind of getting to be finding a way to be okay with that and produce anyway, and get up anyway every day and hit it. And then you find, I'm super proud that we've got this great in everywhere, everything I've got going right now. All of my teams that I'm lucky to be a part of are firing on every cylinder they have, and that's the end. That's the greatest thing. Like when things are just everybody's delivering and working at a great level, and everybody's getting a paycheck, and everybody's eating, and everybody's kids are going to college, like that. Facilitating those pieces or being facilitated for those pieces, it's always good too. Can't really be created if you're under under economic duress. Is a tough place to feel creative.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything in your career that you haven't achieved that you want to achieve at some point?
I really just want to sit around and read books and drink tea. I can't get there. So maybe that's my retirement. I buy books. I love to buy books, but I never have time to read them. I love reading. Yeah, I'm definitely yeah, I've definitely have sort of scratched the creative itch more or less. Someone was asking me this the other day, and I thought, it's been drawn out of me in such ways, like I said, being pulled apart by wild dogs when you're directing. Like I don't necessarily have a burning desire to create. I just create naturally as a result of living in a way. I try to like live that way. Um, so like having something that I haven't done that I really wanted to do, it's almost like that's been beaten out of me. Like it's not that I did everything I wanted to do. I've just done so much anyway that process is always going to be the same no matter what. And so and now that I always wanted to put a company together, or now I'm running two companies, and we're talking about starting a third company that's going to be around technology and AI as this comes in, right? It's if there's anything that I haven't done, it's sort of been replaced by I don't know what's next, but I'm here to figure that out. And so it's almost like the question is sort of reframed, I think it's the thing to do is to stay flexible and keep active and keep your mind going and stay engaged in it. And whatever anything I ever wanted to do is almost out of context now. It's like, do I want to be the next Quentin Tarantino? I not necessarily, I maybe at one point I did. But then I couldn't write. I wasn't a very good writer yet. So, which he's brilliant at, right? So, and among other things. So,
What advice do you have for somebody that's new coming into the animation industry?
well, I think the trick is to realize that you're coming in at an incredibly dynamic time, and what looks like, the end of the world is actually just the next chapter starting. There's never been more resources to learn. I had that one book I found in the library that I managed to get a hold of some information. And now everyone has at their fingertips, you know, infinite information of how this craft works. What they don't have uh, is a focused and centralized industry now that's specifically running in a way that there's a living that can be made. The distribution model and the streaming service, and the TV stations, like everything is like there's so many outlets now, there's so many places content to go, but it's so much more difficult to centralize revenue and to be able to make a living out of it, right? So my advice is to get your revenue stream figured out, get a day job, anything that pays the bills. You got to have a revenue stream, right? And that's the thing that gives you your foundation underneath that you can start to pursue where you can go. And there's AI, AI tools are coming on super strong, but they're really pretty early right now. Definitely want to be very careful about how you use AI. You don't want to be out there stealing everybody's material. So, I think right now, Adobe is one of the more powerful players in the AI industry, in that all of their tools and materials in their AI platform are copyrightable and are not stolen from somebody. They produced in an ethical way, right? I don't know if that's the case across the other generative AI pieces. So you've got to be really careful that you're not stealing someone else's work. That's the baseline. You have to be into ethical authorship. And then, that being the case, AI can't do it for you. It's just another tool. Definitely pick a path, figure out what part of the animation industry you're interested in being in, because it's super specialized. It's like being on a construction crew. You have roofers, you have framers, you have electricians, you have plumbers. all these, you know, people who pour concrete, like it's super specialized. And so if you want to be an animation, like pick what lane. I want to be a character designer. I want to be a background designer. I want to paint. Or do you want to be a producer? You know, I wanted to be a director. And so I thought I knew storyboarding was the arc to directing. And so I became a storyboard artist. But as I said earlier, I was always sort of the opportunity to harness the tools have never been stronger. It's for being in the industry, picking the lane that you want to be in, understanding what role you want to be. If you want to be a creator, you want to be independent creator and create your own IP. Well, you know, there's probably never been a better time. All the creative tools, AI or not AI, all these creative tools are at your fingertips, and you know you can distribute on social media or anywhere you want to go across Pinterest or your ArtStation. Like there's a million places to put your stuff, but there's also a million people to compete with. There's, you know, so your stuff has to be really, really great for anybody to kind of notice it, right? The struggle. But if you want to work professionally, you really got to figure out what lane and how you're going to provide value into the production process. You know, if you are going to be, you know, you have to produce no matter who you are. Like you have to think like a producer. So what am I here to offer? How am I producing something? Character designers that are on point, character designs on point, color theory on point, whatever I'm doing on point, so that I can offer value into the production model and that I can produce for the production. A production produces, everybody on the production produces. So just I think that mindset of being a producer is valuable. In that I'm not looking to just grab on and get onto something. I'm looking to produce. I'm looking to provide value, and I'm looking to always, you know, the magic of animation, the magic of being an artist is there's nothing and then there's something. You know, out of nothing, we're going to make something. And there's never been more tools. There's never been more opportunity to and to learn the ropes of that kind of making of things. There's never been more resources, and sometimes it's hard to whittle through the resources and figure out which ones, you know, to follow. So there can be such a thing as too much information. I'm thankful I just found one book, you know. But I think the mindset of being a producer is the most important thing I would provide. No matter where you go, what got me started and keeps me going and, you know, crying at my desk at 10 or 3:30 in the morning was all about 10xing my output. Like I always knew I'm a kid from a cornfield in Illinois, and I had no way of getting into Hollywood. And I thought, well, what if I deliver 10 times the value? That was the math I did. If I deliver 10 times the value I'm being paid for, I'll probably be able to find someone willing to pay me. And so I always look to do it that way. And I still kind of keep that mindset. If I'm delivering 10x value, we'll keep the lights on.
Hmm.
That's the
Just out
producer.
of just out of curiosity, what does your family think of your career in animation?
Oh, they get it. They've outgrown me a little bit, you know, they tolerate me. They really, you know, they realize it's a fun way to make a living, and we've had a lot of fun with it. My son studies chemistry. He's very much a scientist. My daughters are they're both really good artists. My daughter's studying Japanese language, and she's very interested in psychology. So they're not pursuing in any means following in my footsteps to do any of this. My wife's an architect, so her work is creative and has a technical aspect the way my work is creative and has a technical aspect. So we've sort of raised them in this creative environment, and but they've certainly chosen their own paths, and don't look to follow either of our footsteps. But they tolerate, and they know that I'm usually going to have my drawing tablet out on a dining room table at some point, and I walk around the house mumbling to myself, and I'm on phone calls all day long. So we all just get in their rhythm with it. But everybody's busy with their lives. They're teenagers, and so, but it's definitely, I will say this: growing up, when they were growing up, when they were younger, working at Disney during those 4 crucial years when we had a silver pass, we could go to the parks almost any day for free. That was worth the price of admission right there. That
Yeah.
we had a lot of Disney. We did a lot of Disney days. And funny, when I left the company, they were like, "Oh, good, now we can go to Universal," because we could never go, and we're not going anywhere. We're not going anywhere else. We're not going to go to Universal. It's expensive. We're going to it's free. Well, okay, now we go see Harry Potter World. Finally free of the tyranny of having to go to Disneyland all the time. That was.
That's great. What do you think made Scooby last as long as it has?
I always asked, Ewo about that. Ewo and I had quite a few discussions about what made Scooby tick. and and particularly what was important to keep him alive in the show, like to keep it going. And he would always say, everyone loves a big dumb dog. And he's just Scooby. And the translation of that is that Scooby's all love. He's just love. It's the simplest thing in the world. It's the thing we all need and secretly need and want more than anything, just to be loved and just to love. And Scooby lives a very simple life. And then the other bit of that he would always say is, and Shaggy's the smartest one of everybody because he's figured out it's better to be a dog. And so that's why they're so special together, is that, and he would always say, like, Shaggy and Scooby are the smartest ones in the group because trouble rears its ugly head and they're like, I'm out of here. I'm not sticking around. Let's go. And the other three get into it. The other three always ruin everybody's day, meddle in everybody's business. But Shaggy and Scooby are the first ones to say, I don't want anything to do with this. I just want to live a good life. And Shaggy figured out, you're onto something, Scooby. Let's just go live our lives in love and enjoy ourselves. And then, when the trouble hits and what's the magic that always saves the day is that this sort of playful, imaginative, cartoony magic that these guys are able to pull out of a hat, that's sort of that transcends time and space. They pop up on this thing over here and they pop up over there, and they're able to sort of play this sort of magic trick on the monsters occasionally. And that charm is the core. And then the other thing that Iwo would always say is, and when you're really hitting it, where you really find the sweet spot is when, Shaggy and Scooby, the monster shows up, and then Shaggy and Scooby are dressed like ice cream, vendors, and they hand the monster an ice cream cone, and he takes it and he's like, "Oh, hey, not bad. What? Rawr. Like that beat is like that's the special sauce. Like that's where it all hits because at that point you've even flipped a bad guy
Right.
over to, hey, we can all have a good time. This is nothing to worry about. What was I even chasing you guys for? So I always loved that definition,
Yeah.
that was the thing that people resonated with. And I think that emotional connection to Scooby, love, yeah, love is this emotional connection.
Yeah.
And I used to think, when I was making my Scoobies, I remember people would always come up to me saying, I love Scooby. Oh, I love Scooby. They just kept always saying how much they loved Scooby, expressing that love back. And SpongeBob is still around and is great. But people, SpongeBob was really coming on strong in those days when I was working on Scooby. And I thought, people would be like, I really like SpongeBob. I don't think that they loved, but they liked it. I mean, it's hilarious. But
Yeah.
I don't know that they loved SpongeBob, but they loved Scooby. And I thought that was a very interesting sort of distinction, that there's more of an emotional component um, to Scooby, you know?
Yeah. It makes sense. People love dogs. I mean, I have loved dogs
Yeah.
forever and prefer dogs over cats. And yeah, so you have a talking dog who's super cute,
Mhm.
and you can't go wrong with that.
Yeah. And the more dog stuff he does,
Yeah.
the more, he does like funny human stuff, but the more he acts like a dog sniffing down on the ground and looking around, whoop, that's just, who doesn't love that? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. Do you have any fun stories that you can share about your career, your time working at any of the studios or with any of the people that you worked with? We have heard of your grand entrances that you like to make when you have lunch with Tristan and Jerry.
Well, I really got it from Jerry. Jerry's taught us all to talk to people in elevators, it's okay to just be friendly and say, say things in awkward moments, and you'll realize on the other side of an awkward moment, sometimes there's a person there ready to make a connection and laugh about a moment, and if there isn't, then that's okay too. But 9 times out of 10, just hang out with Jerry and Ewo. Like some of our greatest memories in my greatest is like, just going to lunch with Jerry and Ewo and Tristan, and sometimes Scott would join us. Like just those people kind of getting together. We just enjoyed each other's company. And but there would just be inevitably some kind of a comedy routine going on between Ewo, who was sort of more reserved and tolerant of Jerry, who was this big, boisterous sort of, you know, personality, and those two being best friends was just such a funny dynamic. So just hang in those days when we were spending all day making Scooby cartoons, spending our lunches hanging out with each other and just laughing and joking around. And you know, Iwa was a very interesting guy in that he always was seeing a show or had gone to a performance or had seen something that or been to an art show. Like he was in his 70s and he was still keeping his he was exhausting to hear all the things that he was doing. I wasn't doing any of those things in my 30s. He was more active, engaged in cultural stimulation and going to things than any of us combined. And that was sort of inspirational. So and I think about those days always come back as the golden days of it. But Tristan and I were both very young, soaking up sort of this knowledge that we're sort of the torchbearers of, I guess, in some way now. But just the friendship of each other, work aside, just our natural friendship with you. And then just, yeah, like doing a gag like that, like making a big entrance, it would be, mortifying to my kids if they were with me, like just
Yeah.
hugely embarrassing, but who cares? You'll never see these people in this restaurant again. And they'll probably get a kick out of it. So yeah, things like that. It's good to have a bit, it can be helpful to have a big personality in animation. It's not required,
Yeah.
but yeah, at least have a little bit of fun along the way.
Yeah. It's great. I really like the foreword that you wrote in Jerry's book. And I think it's great that everybody included Raymond in their forewords. Like everybody mentioned her as well. And I thought that was really cool.
Oh, Ramon's a sweetheart. She's great. Yeah. Long suffering saint.
Yeah.
And a beauty.
When
Yeah.
we talked to Jerry, we got to talk to her as well.
Oh,
And
you
we
did.
actually talked to Jerry for 4.5 hours.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, but it was great. He had
Yeah.
great stories and it was just amazing just to hear about his career. It was
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah. And how beautiful is that book? That book is
Yeah,
just
it is.
yeah.
It
And
is.
and Ramon is, she's a delight and rolls completely with every bit that Jerry, does. And again, that's sort of like watching an old comedy routine with each other, like people who know each other so well and know each other's beats and rhythms. And then, just working with Jerry just in general was, if you remember in Goblin King when Scooby like is bobbing for apples and he comes up with the whole mouthful of apples. I mean, that was a full-blown Jerry gag. Like all the whole opening of Goblin King is all Jerry. I literally said, Jerry, just turn yourself loose. Shaggy and Scooby are wandering in the carnival, come up with some bits. And that's a perfect example of a visual gag, a great visual gag where his mouth is full of all the apples, and that's the kind of stuff that Jerry has just, always been the pro of. Just where's the visual touchstone? What's the one image, the one drawing that is over the top and fun, but really clean and clear, and you get the gag.
Yeah,
And he's the master of that.
great. Well, that's all the questions that I have, and it has been just amazing talking to you and learning about your career. And thank you so much for sharing all of this information and spending almost 2 hours with me.
Well, I'm so glad we finally made it happen. We've bounced it
Yeah.
around the calendar all these times, but this has been really great. And thank you for the thoughtful questions. I appreciate getting a chance to talk about some of the things that maybe even seem off topic, and hopefully I didn't bore everyone to tears too terribly.
No, any information you give is amazing. We love it. We love as much information as we can get. So
I'm always happy to come back and dive into Scooby. If you want to dive into movies or behind the scenes of any of these Scooby movies we did, it's always a fabulous chapter to revisit. And
yeah,
much love for the Scooby fandom.
yeah. There's
I'm
a lot of
one,
people that love Scooby-Doo.
I'm
A
one of
lot
them,
more than I ever thought
right?
would
It's
exist.
amazing. It's
So
amazing how these characters have reached out and touched millions of lives and people
yeah,
and just continues. It's a lovely property. And it's the expression of that core heart that's at the middle, at the center of it, the love of this character that gives love to everybody he meets. Pretty
but
great.
it's also the people like you that worked on Scooby that are bringing these characters to life, that are sharing the love of the characters, which and it just makes it incredible. So, props to you for everything that you've done for Scooby-Doo, because without you guys, we wouldn't have him.
Yeah. Well, it was an honor to do it. I mean, for sure, when that's on your desk, to kind of keep that thing going, you can't help but put love into it. And animation is such a labor of love anyway. So it's, it's an, Scooby is the most perfect character to put that love into and to be able to express through. I mean, if you're trying to make good work in the world, that you could do a lot worse than making Scooby cartoons.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And this has been great.
Nikki, it's been my pleasure. Keep it up and great work on the podcast. I'm glad that people are really loving the work that you do. And thank you for sharing all the stories of all these people behind the scenes and getting their stories out there.
Thank you for tuning in to another Scooby panel. I'm Nikki Blake from ScoobyAddicts.com. If you like these panels, please subscribe to my channel for more great discussions. A huge shout out to our patrons: Julie Rosen, Ross from ScoobyFan.net, Tagus, Elizabeth Maloney, Reese, Garrett Spencer, and Paul the Scooby Dude. If you would like to support the Scooby panel, please go to patreon.com/ScoobyAddicts. A very special thank you to director, writer, producer, and storyboard artist Joe Sichta, and to Wendy Bridge for contributing questions for the interview. Scooby Panel is available in podcast form on most podcast platforms, or as a web series on YouTube. You can find Scooby Panel on Instagram, Facebook, and X as @ScoobyPanel. We are now part of the Collector's Maze Network, where you can find all things geek. Scooby and Shaggy were voiced by Scott Innes. Check out Scott's website, onescottshop.com. Scooby Addicts artwork by Will Davenport. Scooby Panel logo by Garrett Spencer. Video editing by Nikki Blake. Music composed and performed by Bovine Nightmares. Please join us next time for another Scooby panel.